Good morning, world changers. It's Suzy Beaumont here, and it's day 4 of creating your personal development plan to self-actualization. With me is transformation coach Murtha, and today we're looking at level 4 of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the development model which outlines 5 basic principles to becoming our true, authentic, congruent self. Now, Maslow's model had the aim of reaching the point of self-actualization, which he believed was a state of everything you are capable of becoming. The fourth need in Maslow's model is the need for esteem, which includes respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, and freedom. So essentially today we are exploring who we are and how to develop our personal philosophy for life. So, well, morning to you. I hope
Morning.
you're well. I kind of feel that this level happens naturally. So, well, certainly the esteem part, and I feel like it happens naturally if we are, doing the personal development. We're, practicing all that we've already spoke about. We're applying the other areas we've discussed, the boundaries, learning to say no, self-care, the personal security, and we've got the resources to do this. It kind of feels like we're getting into the flow and momentum is starting to carry us now towards self-actualization. What's your thoughts on this? Do you think, by now we're getting into flow?
I totally agree. I mean, we've not talked about this before, but just as you were saying that, I thought, yeah, that I agree with that because think of it like a rocket. The image that came to me was a rocket. Rocket going to the moon. Most of the fuel and the effort will be used in the first mile and few
Mm,
miles. Literally, half of it is burnt up in that first mile as it takes off. And I think personal development is a bit like that in that, as we work up this peak, a lot of the heavy lifting, a lot of the hard work, um, that we begin to start with a personal development program or change transformation, call it whatever you like. A lot of the work is done at the beginning. Now, the downside of that is you're putting a lot of work in and not getting that much out as a
yeah.
result. So
And
you're
that's
like,
when people
oh,
give up, isn't it?
that's
Yeah.
when people give up. So think about this model in that as you go further up the Maslow hierarchy, you actually then put less in to get more out. And
Mm,
it's a big thing to work about with behavior change because this is like exactly we're at level 4 now. Now you've got momentum. Now you've got self-discipline. Now things are starting to happen. And that's great. You can carry the flow through. And I think the big thing for me is on this section of section 4, self-esteem, all the other good things, recognizing yourself, your status, your identity. This is really about self. And I think, Socrates said it brilliantly, didn't he? Know thyself. Two
mm,
words, which has become one of the most famous kind of sayings for personal development. Because until you know who you are, where you are, what you want, what you stand for, what your boundaries are, what you'll tolerate and not tolerate, what matters to you. I'm literally reading off a kind of script of what I would call my personal philosophy practice to find out who you are.
mm.
Until you know all that, everything's going to be harder in your life. So, William Bridges said it, one of my favorite books of all time, just to finish, is Transitions by William Bridges. And what he talks about is that really new beginnings first start with endings. So endings, really, if you want a new beginning in your life, which we all kind of want because we want to do
Mm.
better than we've done before, you've really got to start with endings. What does that translate to? Endings is really about what is not working for me anymore and what do I need to let go of, almost like baggage that you've got to get rid of before your balloon can take
Mm.
off. And what I love about this stage 4, you've already done a lot of the letting go. You've already done a
Mm.
lot of the working out that's not working for you on the level 1, 2, and 3. And now you're starting to really be able to fly in your hot air balloon.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the one thing I want to pick up there is that when you're letting go of the stuff that doesn't serve you and you're creating the new, I always find that it's hard because when you stop doing something, you leave a void. So
Mhm.
I always encourage clients to actually just start building the new, building what you want. and it naturally squeezes out what you don't want. Instead
Yeah.
of, taking away something, leaving the void, and then going, oh, I don't know what to do with this space. So actually just filling your life up with the joy, the good stuff, the happy stuff, that then naturally just squeezes out the stuff that, you've been using as the distraction, as the, whatever to deter
Yeah.
you from reaching your true congruent self. But the other thing I wanted to pick up on, what you said about status and recognition, which is another part, which is part of this level, and you started beautifully saying about this is all focusing on the self, get to know thyself, and that this is, I think, status and recognition is an area that certainly with recognition we look to externally, and status too, but that appraisal at work, for example, we're looking for
Mm.
somebody to tell you what your strengths are, what you're good at, what you need to work on. We kind of look for validation externally in recognition and status. So is this where we are getting it wrong at this level, if we are looking for external rather than kind of going, do you know what? I don't need somebody else to tell me I'm good at this or this is my weakness. I know myself. I know this is where I've done a good job. I've achieved this. I know what I've done. I don't know. I know where I'm going. Really understanding that and validating yourself rather than expecting somebody else to do it.
I think that's the malady and challenge of today, isn't it? In that,
Mm,
especially with social media, like I do it with a lot of my influencers. So, who would be an influencer? So,
mm,
a lot of the time that when I'm coaching an influencer, it's to do with they've said something that's a bit out there, that is a bit offline, and a
yeah.
lot of people don't like it. So
Oh, yeah.
the wasps come in with the attack,
Yeah.
and then I
It's a
don't even.
vicious space. It's awful.
I mean, I don't. That's the reason I've come off all
Yeah.
social media apart from LinkedIn. Is that I've observed the downside of what it can do, and I don't
Mm,
like it, and I don't need it. And
yeah.
actually, I'll talk about that at a separate time. But I think with the influencers is that so much of their identity is wrapped up with what they're doing and what they're putting out there,
Mm,
that when they go offline and take a misstep, call it, and the wasps come for them, and I'm talking like thousands of comments in an hour,
yeah.
like comments, let alone like dislikes,
Yeah.
thousands of comments and real vitriol going for the jugular.
Yeah. It's the
Now,
keyboard warriors that are just don't seem to have any filter that actually
no
is a human
empathy.
being at the end of this
No empathy,
reading
no
these comments.
compassion. You're totally right. And no empathy, no compassion, no
Mm,
heart. And actually, it absolutely devastates that person because they didn't expect it. They
mm,
said what they think, which might be controversial, and then suddenly people have decided that I don't like what that person said,
yeah.
and they go for them. They go for the throat. And it's really a sign of today. In that, coming back to your question, really, is that the ultimate goal, we're never going to do this perfectly 100% all the time, but the ultimate goal for all of us in whatever position we're in and whatever age we're in, the ultimate goal is that we get to a point where whatever is said to us externally doesn't impact us internally. And
Mm,
what I mean by impact, yes, of course, it's going to hurt, and it's going
mm,
to, we're human, we've got emotions, we're organic, we're not robots. But what we've got to manage to do is somehow, almost like a sponge, almost like a kind of a shock absorber. We've got to be able to take external criticism
mm,
and not let it absolutely sort of shatter our inside world, which is where
yeah.
self-identity, self-worth, self-value, self-belief, self-confidence live. So, I always talk about the importance of rising our self-confidence, because self-confidence has like kissing cousins. And the minute that when I work with a client and they're raising their self-confidence, like a domino effect, their self-belief hikes, their self-value pitches up, their self-worth, their self-respect, their self-esteem. So confidence is such a big thing. And the best way that we raise our confidence is know who we are and what we stand for.
Mm. And I totally agree. I totally hear you, but I'm thinking about times in my life where I felt really confident. I felt I was in my state of self-actualization. I was being all that I could be. I had a regular practice. I was really developing myself and I was growing. And then, like, so I'll give you an example. When I started doing my conferences, my Change Your World conferences, and I would get incredible feedback. You know, I would have 200 odd people attending. I would have amazing feedback, and then I would have maybe one or two comments that were just basically constructive feedback or just saying, you know, I didn't like that element of it. And I was like, totally minded on that and like disregarded all the other stuff. I went, what do you mean? And like, you know, and I took it, I can remember that feeling of going, oh my God, do you not know how hard I worked on this conference? Do you know how much blood, sweat, and tears I put into this? Do you not know what I'm trying to achieve? Can you not see that? And I was like, why am I doing that to myself? Because I was in that state of where you're saying, you know, we need to get to. I was confident, but that I crumbled. And I also I remember like I used to do daily lives like you. I was on social media a lot. I was doing daily lives, promoting everything that I do, you know, really uh, not there to sell stuff, just really spreading the message of my passion for personal development. And I stopped doing it during the pandemic because of two reasons, really. One, because it was a continuously changing situation, and you know what was relevant one day had completely changed the next day, and I just felt I didn't feel confident enough to speak out and say what I felt was going on, or even just to question things. Because as soon as I started questioning things, I got those attacks as well, and I was like, okay, I know there's a whole load of people out there that are also questioning with me, but I am being controlled and shut down by the people that are don't like what I'm saying. And I wasn't saying anything particularly challenging. I was just kind of going, what's going on? Does anybody else think this is a bit contradictory? Or does anybody else find this confusing? And I stopped myself. And it shut me down and made me small as a result. But I was in that place that you're saying that we need to get to, but it still wasn't enough. So maybe I'm deluding myself. Maybe I wasn't where I needed to be. But how do we stop ourselves from being crumbled down? Because you know, when we look at the other levels, we do need to be accepted. We do need love and belonging, like we talked about in day 3. You know, that acceptance. So again, it's all coming back to the self-acceptance, isn't it? The self validation that why is it that we find so difficult to apply to ourselves and maintain, I suppose, is what I'm asking.
I mean, this is kind of multi-level, but let's just start with the easy one in that, you know, for many tens and hundreds of thousands of years, we've developed the brain in a certain way. You know, modern human beings, 200,000 years or so around. That the reptilian brain element of the part of the brain is, you know, let's go back to the tribe. Let's go back to the tribe. So if we get excluded and criticized and thrown out of the tribe, that kind of meant instant death, sort of
Yeah,
5,000 years ago.
survival, yeah.
Survival, right? So we are primed to make sure that we collaborate, that we are part of a system. The minute some of that system attacks us and almost threatens in a group like social media to throw us out, to damn us, to shame us, it kickstarts something that is more primal than we're looking at in our tiny little life. It goes way back. So we're triggering something that is inside of us from many, many generations back of learning through our brain, you know, through our genes that we're picking up from our bloodline. So what we've got to realize is that we're naturally being triggered because our sense of connection, a sense of belonging, of being of community, of being appreciated, understood, relationship is being attacked. So of course we're going to be triggered, right? No matter how confident we are, which is the kind of point that you're saying. So what I do with influencers is kind of get them to build a philosophy of mantras that straight away, the minute they're attacked, they go into a couple of different thought forms. And one of them might be along the lines, I've just done it recently. One of them might be, well, I'm not for everyone and everyone's not for me.
Yeah.
And that is just something we have to accept.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's actually just a true fact. It's not,
it's a true fact.
you
I'm not
can't
talking,
please everybody.
can't please people, can't please everybody all the time. So that is like one. And then another thing is that I will get an influencer to, before they post, I will already get them to think about that if it's controversial, the wasps are already going to come for you. You are going to anger and trigger lots of people. So be prepared, or if you're not prepared to take the sting, don't send it out. If you're not in a confident enough mood where your mood is, your emotions are up and your confidence is high, don't bother sending it out then, because it's only going to bring you back down again.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you've got something meaningful to say, you can't just give people everything they want. Otherwise, we live in a complicit society where no one becomes an innovator or comes out of the comfort zone.
Diversity.
There's no diversity at all. And that's what we're driving towards, the
Yeah.
diversity of thought and diversity of opinion. So when you know yourself and you really go, do you know what? I know it's going to upset people. I know it's going to trigger people, but that is often about them, not about what I'm saying, because what we're living through at the moment is a time where so many people have mixed up emotions. They don't actually realize that when you, let me give you an example. You post something that's controversial, load of people come back at you with real anger and venom and vitriol. A lot of that stuff is not really about you. A lot of the stuff is not even what you say, Suzy.
Yeah.
What it is, it's triggered some part inside of them, a wound, an unhealed, unexpressed emotion that they haven't worked through yet. It might be to do with their workplace, their boss, something that happened to them years ago. And I think we take it too personal that us and what we say is what people are really going for. But there's multiple layers behind that. It's called projection, isn't it, in psychology? Bad day at work, go home, kick the dog. What people are doing instead of kicking the dog, they're kicking us as the content producers and expressors. So, I try to really get my clients, and not just influencers, because, a CEO of a board, a footballer, a mum who's just started a business at home and all her friends are criticizing her, and even her own mother doesn't believe in her. So, what I would get people to do as a little exercise is imagine the 4 points of the compass. If someone's got this when they're being criticized and they're challenging them and their self-esteem is very low, I will get them to take a compass, northeast, southwest, and I will get them to go to 4 people that they trust to give them a really good judgment, good judgment and feedback comment. And then, for instance, say you posted something and you went to 4 of your friends and said, was I really extreme? Was it kind of like a bit naive? Was I kind of, not being respectful? Was I? And if 4 or 3 of the people went, no, not really, Suzy, then straight away you've got the evidence that you're not being racist, you're not being this, you're not being that, you are being inclusive. And if you've got that opinion, that settles your mind to go, do you know what? It's not about me or what I say, it's about them. Because I think this is really important. This is one of the biggest questions that humanity is asking itself. We're seeing it in workplaces all the time, where people challenge us with a different sense of opinion, a different mindset, and we're locking horns with someone. Well, the biggest challenge for the next few years is to be civil and respectful and try to see what the other person is going through. Look at the world from their lens on the other side of the tennis court, and literally get to a point where we go, okay, I with empathy, sitting in someone else's shoes, compassion is love in action. How can I cross over and look at the world from their perspective, respect what they're saying, but still hold my ground as well?
Yeah, because you don't have to agree with it, but understanding why this person has got this viewpoint and, has led them to this. And this is something we didn't actually touch on in day 3 about the importance of role models and who we surround ourselves by, because there's the theory that you become the direct reflection of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So, when I learned this, I was horrified because I was thinking the 5 people I spend the most time with, they're not uplifting, empowering, they're not good for me, and they were very negative influences around me. So it's thinking about when you're saying, go to those 4 people that you trust. You've got to know that you're going to get that
Mm,
honest feedback, that constructive, compassionate feedback, that's going to be done in a way that's done with empathy, respect, and done with a view to help you grow and not, belittle you, put you down, keep you small, and put you back in your box, basically. So, I think it's really important to think about who you do have around
mm,
you. Who are the people that do lift you up, that will give you that absolute honest feedback? I mean, Alistair, my life coach, is my absolute go-to. He doesn't
mm,
mince his
mm,
words, but he does it in a way that is perfect for me in terms of what I need to hear in order for me to have constructive feedback and growth. If we look at self-esteem, because this is what we're talking about here. If we've got our self-esteem and our confidence,
mm.
we can look at these situations objectively, these where the challenges come in, the criticism comes in, and we can respect the other person's point of view without, taking ownership of it and feeling like it's a personal attack. So how do we cultivate that self-esteem, that inner strength, that confidence that we're talking about that is at this level here?
So it's not so much one or two big particular things we do. It's a combination, a
Mm,
compound effect, isn't it,
yeah.
of building up certain elements, almost like a jigsaw puzzle piece. So, take for instance this what we're talking about with an attack, for an example. If you would have been in the level 1 or level 2 in Maslow's hierarchy, where you haven't got any safety,
Yeah.
you're already on rocky ground where you're really kind of scared, frightened, fearful. So if someone's going to attack you, then you're just going to fall to pieces because you've got
Yeah.
no solid
Your
ground
personal
to.
security has just been totally attacked, hasn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
Yeah.
But once you get into the higher reaches, sort of level 4, where you really want to start solidifying and strengthening your self-esteem, it really becomes then a project of personal philosophy.
Mm,
So, in my Create Your Own Life Story book, I've really kind of had a whole chapter on personal philosophy and what we have to do to build a personal practice because, you know, personal development is really about knowing yourself. And actually, what we've found out over the years, most of us don't know ourselves. We're
mm,
running at such a pace where we're having experiences. We're not even like me and you were talking just before we jumped on. You know, how many people go through their life kind of having lots and lots of experiences and don't even pull back to have the reflective space
yeah.
to make sense of those experiences, to feel the emotions that those experiences elicited. So, one of the things we've got to start doing if we want to know ourselves, it really means we've got to start building a regular practice, whether it's journaling, whether it's kind of power hour, control the first hour of your day,
Mm,
whether it's a habit tracker, which is basically tracking your habits that are working for you and your behaviors and which ones aren't. A regular practice is really about a reflection time where you can keep at several times of the week. Great if you can do it a few times a day, but particularly first thing in the day and last thing in the day, a reflection practice with your journal to start putting down what has happened to you, because the more you realize who you are and how you respond and how you trigger yourself, the more your confidence and value and self-worth and particularly self-esteem is going to grow. Because if you know yourself solidly and you know what matters to you, you know what you care about, you know that what who you are, the essence of a person. If you know all this stuff, then it's really hard for other people to break through. And like me and you have talked before, Susie, one of the biggest things that helps us to raise our self-esteem is to have strong boundaries about what is acceptable from other people, what they do to us, and what is not acceptable. And probably 15 years ago, 20 years ago, most of us minions had never even heard of the word boundaries. Unless you were a psychotherapist or really into psychology, you would not have even heard. I mean, now boundaries is used everywhere. Oh, I've got to put boundaries up. I've got you hear kids talking about it and the rest. So it's part of the lexicon now, it's part of the language. And I think, there are certain things that we need to do to know ourselves, and we're going to talk a little bit later on this, but one of them is obviously getting in touch with our shadow, and really digging down to see what inside of us still needs healing. What do we not want to show the world of our character? What are we ashamed of and get ridden of? The shadow part is basically the part that we don't want to show to culture, to society. And I think it's a really important subject.
It is really important. I mean, underlying everything you've just said there is essentially values, and it's understanding what your values are. And we never, well, I certainly wasn't, and we're never taught to kind of go, okay, what's important to you? What are your values? When you show up in a relationship, when you show up at work, when you show up in your friendships, what are the core values that must be maintained? I mean, it's similar to boundaries, but it's like, what's important to you? Is it kindness? Is it loyalty? Is it trust? Is it productivity if we're talking about work? Is it, fulfillment? What are these values that you need in these different areas of your life? And are you getting them? Are you taking the action steps that cultivate and are in alignment with those? And when you feel hacked off or resentful or all these negative emotions that we can feel, it's when those values are being trampled all over, and if we're not even conscious of them. So that's what we're saying about get to know yourself, understand why that value is, and is it actually truly your own value, or is it a value that's just been instilled through your childhood, through your upbringing, just that actually you're like, I'm fighting for this value, but actually I don't really believe it. It's just something my mum always said, or my dad always said, or something our family kind of, and it's just like, actually, it's not really true for me. It's not, I don't really value this. So again, getting to know yourself. But the shadows, you've brought it up, so let's talk about that. It is those parts of us that we don't want people to see. I always think, it's these Big Brother shows that you have and stuff like that. I mean, they're always, obviously being recorded, and, these reality shows. And it's the thing, you're on your best behavior because you're being watched, and you're changing it, like quantum physics, like we've talked to before. You change your behavior because it's being watched, it's been observed, and it changes naturally. However, there is a time, and you see it in these programs, where you can't keep that mask on. You can't keep up the pretense because it's not your true authentic self. And that's when the spillage, you've talked about keeping the beach ball down before, and that we see it in these shows, and we see people acting out and sometimes in really horrendous ways. And you're like, oh, you're cringing for them because it's there on the TV for everybody to see, millions of people to see. However, we all do it. We all do it in the privacy of our own homes. I remember one of our other coaches, Angela Trainer, telling me about this really big American influential coach. And, he was going on, like really well respected. And he's got something like, I don't know, 10 kids, which I think's amazing that you can.
No electricity, obviously.
Well, I was like, how you can function and be doing all you do with 10 kids in the background. But anyway, he, there was one day and he just lost it. His kids absolutely kicking off, just like, ah. And one of the kids just went, well, 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 imagine if your audience could see you now, Mr. Enlightened one kind of thing. And it was just like brought him right down to the reality of,
Humbling, very humbling.
yeah, very humbling. We're all human. We all have our flaws. We all have our shadows. And sometimes we're not at our best. And quite often we can not be at our best. And, it can be ugly and unpleasant. So, how do we embrace that? How do we accept it? And I suppose what happens when we do start bringing in that shadow and acknowledging it and showing it to other people in a way that's like, this is me and I know I need to work on it.
I mean, it's such an interesting concept because, I started writing a book with the psychotherapist Malcolm Stern on the shadow. Unfortunately, it never got picked up. We might pick it up again at a later date. The publisher wasn't felt it wasn't the right time. I think it is the right time because I
Curse of the
think,
trailblazer, you see, waiting for
yeah,
people to catch up. Well,
well, I just think, I think the shadow is, let's get it, Jung, if you want to look up any work on the shadow, Jung is obviously the
yeah,
man,
Carl
Carl
Jung,
Jung.
yeah.
And so, the shadow really, it's not something that for years, what we've done, the wrong thing is that we've pushed the shadow into the basement, the beach ball
Mm,
below the water.
mm.
But as we know, the beach ball has more pressure and it comes whizzing out, and this is what happens with the shadow. Because if there's an element, what we got to realize is that the shadow is really Jekyll and Hyde. So, Jekyll is the good guy that everyone tries to portray to the world, the mask they put on, the persona they call it in Greek. The Hyde, Hyde is the kind of shadow that we don't want to show. That's our worst side. It's our anger that we haven't dealt with, issues. It's philandering. It's all the bad things that are
Yeah.
human traits. Because I genuinely believe, we've done this work a long time. I believe we're all fabulously flawed. We're all perfectly imperfect.
Mm,
We're all in need of desperately showing our vulnerability. But if at the end of the day we try and put a perfect picture on this beautiful shop window, um, it's really hard to keep that shop window going, isn't it? Because we've all got frailties and flaws and imperfections. That is the human condition. And the Victorians were notorious for this, weren't they? When you watch a Victorian drama, there's the kind of, the leader of the house, and he's kind of, and his wife is all perfect and the kids are perfect, and the husband goes out and kind of visits prostitutes at night time, and
mm,
and does sort of all this illicit like drug dealing and things like that. And actually the Victorian age was a really good metaphor, a really good example of where society was trying to portray something pitch perfect, but so much more was going on underneath the surface.
But yeah, it's that status again, though, isn't it? It's keeping up appearances and, you know, ex- behave, trying to behave in a certain way to get that validation, but yet clearly not living in alignment with yourself, so that you have to do all this stuff behind the scenes just to cope, to feel alive, to, live some semblance in alignment with your values. Not that I'm saying going with a prostitute is going with your values, but there's something, if we look at the root of that, you know, it gives them something, it's excitement or distraction or whatever it might be.
Acting out, we call it, don't we?
Yeah.
They're acting out something that they can't do in their normal life, in their civil life, their persona. So they have to do it in secret. And
Mm.
what society's coming to a point now is, and Brené Brown has done some brilliant
Oh,
work
she's
around
amazing. I love
having the
Brené Brown's
courage
stuff.
to
Yeah.
bring out vulnerability. She's the one that's put the stamp on this whole
Yeah.
body of work, where we've got to gradually start to show our vulnerability
Mm.
to others. Because actually, we used to think years ago, for the last 200 years, vulnerability was a weakness.
Mm.
Actually, we're starting to discover vulnerability
Huge
as a
strength.
strength. I mean, how many times have you had an amazing conversation with someone where they've told you some secrets about their
Mm.
weaknesses and vulnerability, and you really lean into them, you tell them some of yours, and before you know it, you're having one of the most deep, profound,
Mm.
life-changing conversations because you've shown your wounds, they've shown
Mm.
you their
Mm.
wounds, And I mean, there's a great, I always keep coming back to the great Native American little story about the grandchild and the grandfather, and the grandfather is sort of telling a little story around the fire to his grandson that there's a fight inside all of us, you know, and you know, there's two wolves that war with each other, and the kind of big-eyed, wide-eyed, the little grandchild is sort of, wow, what, you know, tell me more. And he says, yeah, there's two wolves living inside us. One is kind of evil, it's anger, it's sorrow, it's regret, it's greed, arrogance, sort of inferiority, ego, lies. I'm trying to kind of get all the metaphors. Self-pity, superiority, you know, false pride. And he said the other wolf is good. It's kind of love and peace and love and serenity and kindness and empathy and truth and compassion and caring for the world. And, you know, the kind of grandson, well, which one, you know, says to the grandfather, which one wins then, you know, grandfather? And he says, well, simply the one that you feed.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's a great metaphor for the shadow. All of those things that I mentioned under evil are potentially inside of us, you know, and what we've got to do now is integrate. Whereas the old model for a few hundred years has been push out the evil as if it's like, oh, point the finger, everybody else is evil but not me. Well, the fact is that 90% of people, this is like roughly the facts, 90% of the people that murder another person didn't do it and plan it. They just lost control of their emotions at the wrong time,
Yeah.
and killed someone. And then literally the minute they killed them, full of remorse, and then had to cover it up possibly. But actually, you know, so few people are inherently evil, but we've got to realize that evil is still possible. And given the wrong conditions, we've all got it inside of us. And I think that is the shadow. I mean, I've given an extreme example because shadow might be having affairs, it might be embezzlement of a company, it might be watching porn, it might be spending money that you haven't got, it might be, you know, all the things that come up in my coaching sessions. You know, we're all capable of having this darker side, this shadow in us. And what we've got to start doing now is integrating it and appreciating that it's part of us, and not trying to push it out to say, oh, look at that James Corden there, and I thought he was a nice little cheeky chap, like, you know, always having a laugh and very friendly. And look at him, the way he was talking to those on film. Do you remember that story last year or the year before? He got caught in a restaurant in New York, really abusing the staff. Well, he's human like all of us.
Yeah.
And
Might
for
be
us,
having a bad day. You don't know what was happening the lead up to that,
exactly,
what conditions created that, where he'd just been pushed to the limit.
that is shadow.
Yeah.
That is shadow. We've
Yeah.
all got
And
it.
yeah, and we have all got it. And I think that's important to sort of acknowledge, because, you know, we can often really beat ourselves up when, especially when you're doing this work and you're trying to, you know, go, okay, I've got to be kind, I've got to be spiritual, I've got to be loving, I've got to be giving. And, you know, somebody's just a total dick to you. And you're just like, wow, you lose it. And you're just like, you know, you project all the frustrations, the tiredness, the sleep deprivation you might not have had. You know, we've got all these things that come into the play that allows the shadow to come in. But you know, it is kind of bringing it in and going, okay, I accept it. And this is something, I mean, you know, this is a big part of work that I've been doing during my psychotherapy course, very much looking at the shadow work. And it's very uncomfortable. You're just like, you know, I've had to write about assignments and I'm like, somebody else is going to read this. You know, like I'm talking about all my shadows, I'm talking about the coping mechanisms I've used, you know, I'm just like, I don't really want to acknowledge this to anyone else. However, as soon as you start to acknowledge it, you can start to work with it, and you start to, you've said it, if you name it, you tame it, you
Yeah.
know? And it's kind of, you can't do any of this work until you recognize what the problem is, and you can
Own
start
it.
addressing it.
Then you got to own it. Then you got to sit with it. And you know why is this relevant? Because all of these things will help you be comfortable in your own body, to sit with your own flaws. And the ultimate consequence is that it will help you with your self-worth, self-confidence, and especially self-esteem.
Yeah. And I mean, it's that thing, because if you do know these things about yourself and somebody else attacks you with it, you go, yeah, I know. I know that's me. I own it. It completely takes the power out of it. There's no personal attachment. The person can't have a go at you. They can't attack you because you're like, yes, I hold my hands up. That's me. That it's like, oh, I don't know what to
I've got
do.
nothing to hide. I've got nothing to hide. And,
Yeah.
because a lot of attacks are shame missiles in a way,
Absolutely.
aren't they?
Shame aligned, yeah.
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 And shame silences us. That it
It disables us.
yeah. And it does, it keeps us quiet, it keeps us um just frozen. It stops us from growth
Yeah.
because like you're saying, completely disables us because it does stop us from growing because we do think, if anybody else knows that about me, I'll not, that's it. They'll judge me. They'll do this. But it's like you're actually judging yourself more harshly than probably anybody else was. And that's what you started saying about Brené Brown. One of the quotes that I remember from her when she's saying, when you watch somebody give a talk, when they open up and they share a vulnerability, you don't judge them. You look at them and go, you feel it.
Me
And you
too. Me
go,
too.
oh my gosh, like, wow, thank you. Like, you believe that they're so brave. Yet when it comes to yourself and you think, oh God, I can't share that because you think, oh no, people will judge me, they'll do this. But yet you're like, wait a minute, you just said that that person's really brave for sharing it. So why aren't you brave for sharing it? You know, but yes, I'm conscious time is running on. And one of the last things I want to talk about is the other elements of this level, strength and freedom. And I think that does come from, everything that we've discussed. When we can be vulnerable, it gives strength and it liberates us. It liberates us from the shame story that we're carrying, the shadows that we're carrying. Um, And I do think when you feel that, because I know there's times in my life that I felt really strong and I felt free, and I know how amazing that feels. So again, how can we cultivate this state of inner strength of so it liberates us, so that we're creating a space for freedom to be truly who we are without everything we're talking about, without crumbling at somebody else's personal opinion or attack or, what
I,
everything they say about us.
I mean, it's a multi-layered process, but I think that I immediately go to courage.
Mm,
Um, I think the biggest thing that we're trying to do here is to build our inner strength, is to not get rid of, but master fear, isn't it? Fear, we talk about love and hate. Well, as two of the most powerful emotions at either end of the
mm,
spectrum. I don't think it is hate. I think it's fear, because I think we've got such a great imagination that is mostly underrated by most people.
mm,
We've got an incredible imagination that can work amazing things for us and get us out of problems and do all this stuff.
mm,
But it can also go the other way and create catastrophizing off the scale. And I think what fear can do, fear is like a nuclear bomb going off, especially when we're not very self-assured, we're not very confident of who we are. Our security is kind of fragile, and mental health is fragile. I think fear can really run riot in us.
mm,
And the only antidote for fear is courage. Because I think what we've got to do occasionally is step up, go beyond our comfort zone, and make sure that we sit with our fear and get to know fear rather than push it away. Again, it's that beach ball in the water. Keep pushing it down, because most people don't like fear. It's
mm,
full of uncertainty. It's uncomfortable. They're not used to dealing with it. They think it's going to overwhelm them emotionally. So, the biggest thing we can learn, we could do a whole program of 5 sessions, Susie, on just overcoming fear, because fear is probably one of, especially when the media and the papers and the world out there has used fear as a way of controlling people, and particularly therefore controlling your mind, which really means controlling the emotions in your body. So the extreme version of fear is where anything that's happening in the outside world is creating an emotion that is putting into a kind of paralysis, that ultimate fear. And I think the biggest, what we've got to all learn to do is to manage fear, not push it away, because it's without fear, we'd be a danger to ourselves. So it's a very
It's
necessary
unnecessary. Yeah, we need
thing.
it. Mm.
It protects us and the rest of it. But extreme fear, a bit like stress. Stress is good for us. Actually, it keeps us alive. We need stress. Makes us do things.
Yeah.
Extreme amounts of stress over long periods causes major illnesses, including cancer. We know that.
Yeah.
Fear is the same. In small parts, it's great, but extreme, constant, long-term fear, it will shut our life down. And we've got to somehow find the courage, one job at a time, one challenge at a time, to literally go, right, now I need to show up, and now I need to step beyond. Now I need to get a bit uncomfortable and challenge that person back. I need to have a confrontational meeting with someone. I need to tell my husband or wife that wasn't working for me, and that's going to be an awkward conversation. This is courageous conversations are one of the worst things that I've noticed the British are really bad at. Most other countries are really good, especially Latin countries. If I'm coaching someone with a Spanish background, Italian, South American background, they're really good at
just passionate, aren't they?
Passionate, and therefore getting it out, having that courageous conversation. The British, some of the Nordic countries, Northern Europe particularly, we're one of the worst in the world because we don't like confronting people. We don't like conflict, basically. So we've got to get away from that. One of the biggest things we're all working on is learning how to sit with emotions and then express them.
Yeah. So again, I mean, it ultimately comes back to being confident in who you are, showing up in everything that you are, and being okay with that. That's the self-esteem that we're trying to cultivate, and just going, this is who I am. Accept it, or just leave me alone. If you don't, just please just walk on by if it's too much for you. So yeah, this is what essentially we are trying to encourage our members and listeners to do, and just reach that place of going, this is who I am, and what I'm about. So, and hopefully through this coaching week, you will start you on that journey. I mean, there's one thing I want to talk about, just the blind spots that you may have. You may think, well, I don't know what my shadows are. I don't know what this is. I mean, I'm presuming you would advocate journaling for that again, because I know this is your go-to tool for personal development.
I mean, blind spots are a big part of self-coaching. So, if, for instance, if someone come to me and they've just started the coaching process, doesn't matter whether you're doing it with a coach or doing it for yourself, it's still self-development. The first thing I would say is there's 3 elements to self-coaching or coaching. One, there are things you want to change that you know about. Number 2 is there are things that you know about in your behaviors and habits, but at the moment you don't want to change them for whatever reason. That's fine. Number 3 is there are blind spots. There was blind spots yet that you haven't been aware of that will come up when you start to do journaling work or when you work with a coach. The great thing is the more you do self-development, the more you'll actually get more comfortable at being vulnerable with that number 2. So the stuff you know about that needs to change, but you're not ready to, you will gradually become more and more ready and accepting and sharing, because that's part of still blind spots, but it's visual blind spots as opposed to unconscious blind spots. And so self-development is all about bringing the dark into the light. Again, that shadow work, because your blind spots are where your work are, where your work is. So, blind spots have got to be worked on gradually.
Yeah. I think we'll end there. And that's pretty much what it is. It's about taking action, find out what those blind spots, find out who you are. Again, thank you, Will. Another great session. We will be back tomorrow with day 5, and we'll be talking all about where we're trying to get to, self-actualization. So until then, we look forward to seeing you then. And I look forward to your reflections. If you want to share what you've discovered about yourself today, what you need to work on, what your vulnerabilities are, you willing to share some of your shadows with us and, start that process of truly accepting who you are, and what you stand for. So loved you all. Thanks again. Thank you again, Will. And we will see you again for day 5.
See you again, guys. Take care.